Investigating the investigators, Attorney General Bill Barr has critics all fired up after launching a probe into how this whole Trump-Russia investigation started. Something tells me, though, he could care less what his critics have to say.
Any attorney general in this period is going to end up losing a lot of political capital, and I realize that. And that's one of the reasons that I ultimately was persuaded that maybe I should take it on, because I think at my stage in life it really doesn't make any difference.
You're at the end of your career? Or?
I'm at the end of my career.
But it's a reputation that you've worked your whole life on now.
Yeah, but everyone dies.
Former Republican Congressman and Fox News contributor Trey Gowdy. Trey, what do you make of this? Because, I got to tell you personally, I think Bill Barr has been refreshing, and I feel very confident now as to getting some true closure on all of this.
Yeah, he's a serious legal mind trying to do a legal job in an impossible political environment. And I appreciate his willingness to accept this role. There was a friend of mine named John Ratcliffe, I think, was up for it. I think most people will take a long, hard look at whether or not they want to subject themselves to, number one, the confirmation process, and secondarily, the unmitigated duplicity and hypocrisy that exists in our current political environment. So I'm glad he did it. He's a really, really good lawyer, but everything that comes out of his mouth is subject to a political analysis, and no lawyer can function in that environment.
But you hit the nail on the head, right? Because this polarizing political environment we're in is not going to go away anytime soon. And while Bill Barr talks about being at the end of his career, he's at a point right now where he can get something done. And otherwise, it's just going to be left out there. It's going to be up to interpretation. And even after perhaps the IG's report, his report, everything else, both sides will probably take what they want from this. But I think the American people desperately are seeking closure.
Well, I think they are. I think the American people also desperately want a Department of Justice that they have confidence in, even if they may episodically disagree with certain decisions made. He's an institutionalist. He's a DOJ guy from way back. He cares very much about repairing the reputation of that department and the Bureau, because he's the boss of the Bureau in a sense as well. So I'm glad he's there. I think if given the time and the objectivity and an open-minded jury, he can get to the bottom of some of these fact patterns. But, Charles, half the country at least, and certainly half the Congress, doesn't have any interest in getting to the factual predicate of Russia or whether or not the FISA application process was abused. It's an outcome determinative world. If you don't like Trump, nothing's going to change that. And if you like Trump, nothing's going to change that.
So if we find that the origins of this Russia probe were nefarious to begin with, and some of the complaints that have been voiced from day one turn out to be legitimate, then what does that? You're saying that should not have any impact on the way things are? I would suspect it could. Really?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Peter Strzok with a historic level of bias, who was leading the Russia investigation, and said his real concern was that there was no there, and if it wouldn't result in impeachment, he wasn't interested. This was the lead FBI agent, and I finally found a cop that Democrats can defend and support. Unfortunately, it was Peter Strzok.
Yeah.
I could not believe in that hearing they're defending someone with a historic level of animus and bias.
I want to get your reaction to something House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff calling Republicans a bunch of cowards. Listen here.
Over time, I've had even senior Republicans will say in hushed tones, keep doing what you're doing. But I'm frankly exhausted by the private misgivings. People need to speak out. And I think there's been an epidemic of cowardice in the GOP. This president doesn't stand for anything the Republican Party said it stood for.
An epidemic of cowardice in the GOP. Trey, your thoughts?
Well, let's just get the top line out of the way. I don't know a single Republican that gives a damn what Adam Schiff thinks about him or her or the Republican Party. There are three kinds of Republicans Adam really likes: those that vote with Democrats, those that lose, and those that die. And for most of us, that's too steep a price to pay to curry favor with Adam Schiff. This is the same Adam Schiff that did everything in his power to keep you from finding out that Hillary Clinton had her own server and classified information traversed that server. He did everything he could to make sure you never found that out, Charles. The dossier, you wouldn't know about it if it was up to Adam Schiff. The FISA application and what was used in it, you wouldn't know about it if it was up to Adam Schiff. He went to court to make sure you did not know that the DNC funded Christopher Steele's work, and you wouldn't know about the struck page text if it were up to Adam Schiff. So the king of transparency is one of the most overtly partisan charlatans that I had the pleasure of serving with. Right. And that's why there are plenty of Democrats. I do care what they think. Adam Schiff just ain't one of them.
Trey Gowdy, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
So the Trump campaign was not warned that 2 aides were already under FBI investigation during a 2016 intel briefing. Let's bring in the Democracy for America Chairman Charles Chamberlain and former DOJ prosecutor Jim Trusty. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening. How you doing?
First, I'd like to get your reaction to what my colleague Catherine just reported. What stands out to you? Let's start with Jim and then Charles.
Well, I think, she's got a lot of good stories there, very interesting ones. The one that kind of grabs me is the defensive briefing issue. And there's always a tension there. There's always a question of, are we going to alert people and hopefully prevent crime, or are we trying to build a case? And the problem, the conflict that Catherine talked about, is that Peter Strzok is probably the exact wrong guy, based on what we've seen from his text messages and seen from him testifying, the exact wrong guy to make that kind of decision as to what should be given over to the Trump campaign. Right. So that's a troubling area that I think Durham will be looking at.
Charles, your thoughts?
I think it's pretty ridiculous to even consider the idea that if you're investigating somebody, you're going to tell them you're investigating them. You don't go to a mob boss and say, hey, we're investigating you, so maybe you should stop doing things now. That's not how it works. That's not how police work works. And I think it's clear that what they did is they followed the law and did the right thing, investigated what were clearly questionable contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia.
Jim, where do you see things heading?
There wouldn't be a concept.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying there wouldn't even be a concept of defensive briefing if that was true. I mean, obviously investigators don't want to expose where they're going with an investigation, but there is this concept of preventing crime from happening, maybe at the expense of a criminal or counter-espionage case. So go ahead. Sorry, what were we going to ask?
Well, what's your take on prosecutors releasing the transcript of that voicemail from a former Trump attorney that Michael Flynn said was an attempt to influence his cooperation in the Russia probe?
Well, a couple of things. One is joint defense agreements are actually pretty common. It's a scenario where you're extending attorney-client privilege to a group of defendants or targets and through their attorneys so they can kind of all digest the investigation that's happening around them. Mm-hmm. The tripwire, the tricky part of these, is that when a person decides to cooperate with the government, they have to withdraw from that joint defense agreement. So everyone suddenly knows, oh, this guy's not making the meetings anymore. He must be on Team America. And that's what this phone call seems to be, is kind of ground zero when that decision was made by Flynn.
Alarm bells start going off. Charles?
But what's not common is the idea that the DOJ is just ignoring a court order that requires them to submit the document. I mean, it's pretty unheard of, the idea that they would fight with the court and say, no, we're not going to give you this document because we don't want to. That's not how it works. If the court demands a document, they need to give it up. The court has the responsibility to make those decisions, and the DOJ has the responsibility to do it. But instead, what we're looking at is we're looking at another step of Attorney General Barr participating in covering up what's really happening here by not complying with direct orders.
In that call, the lawyer saying to Flynn's attorney that the president still had warm feelings for Flynn and asked for a heads up if Flynn knew anything damaging about the president. Your reaction to that, Jim?
Well, look, that's the delicate walk that Dowd had to walk, which is, there's kind of a fine line between just acknowledging that somebody is probably cooperating and maybe having quite genuine concerns that, hey, there might be some serious national security things that you're about to spill over to the government that we should probably know about. So I don't think there's anything too nefarious to read into it. It's a difficult spot to be in.
Right.
He was obviously fishing for some information, but whether his motives were anything particularly sinister is kind of a hard question to answer.
Charles, final thoughts?
I mean, I think that fishing is exactly what was happening. They're fishing to find out what kind of new allegations are going to happen that they don't know about or that they do know about and they're afraid are going to come out. I think that we're looking at an incredibly corrupt administration that's doing everything they possibly can to cover up their wrongdoing and trying to distract with basically a shell game of this investigation into another investigation so that we've got too many investigations. It makes it harder for the American people to actually focus on what's important here. I think the American people are smart enough to see what's really going on, and they can see through what the Trump administration is doing.
Charles Chamberlain, Jim Trusty, gentlemen, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Sure, thank you.